Okay, so welcome to our webinar about writing for National Board. And happy to introduce Kate Grindon, who is a board certified teacher, and I'm sure we'll talk to you about that process, and is currently working as an effectiveness coach at the Department of Education. And I'll let her introduce herself. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the work that I work on, and also I'm going to ask Holly to introduce herself too.
Hi guys, I'm Kate. It's very nice to digitally meet all of you. I am currently in a hotel room in Owensboro, so I apologize for the lights and bed behind me. I usually do this PD in person, and so it's a little funky to do it digitally. I'm still getting used to this. So apologize in advance for the lighting and for the funkiness. As Suzanne mentioned, I got my national boards in 2007, and then I actually renewed last year in 17, last year, whatever that was. So I've done it the first time, and I've gone back for seconds. It was one of the, as many of you I think know, most rewarding experiences I've had in terms of professional development. So I'm always really happy to support that process. In the intervening years, I've spent a lot of time working as a mentor, and then we called them CSPs. So a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight are things that I've observed or have learned over the years being a CSP. I am no longer a CSP officially because I left my district, but I think I still have a CSP's heart, and I still love to help out candidates anytime I can. So my certification area was in early adolescent English language arts, and that's my background. So I think that's it. I think that's everything in terms of an introduction. Suzanne?
Yes, thank you. So, Kate also does some work with the University of Louisville, and she has her doctorate. So,
that too.
Little things. I certified in 2004, and I certified as a preschool teacher. So my background is an early childhood generalist. And then after working in preschool, I also worked in kindergarten a lot, and worked in an early childhood center for a long time, and became a math interventionist through the Kentucky Center for Mathematics Math Achievement Fund grants, and worked primarily with early childhood students in the early childhood center. And then I transferred to an elementary school and continued as a math interventionist, and I was an interventionist when I renewed board certification. And then 3 years ago, I was hired to be the Kentucky site director for a grant called the Network to Transform Teaching. And so I'm on leave from the Danville Independent Schools. I live in Danville, and I've been working with the National Board and the U.S. So the U.S. Department of Education funds a grant through the National Board, and that work has been primarily initially it was really about candidate support and teacher leadership. What do we do with board certified teachers after they certify? And now we've done a lot more to realize that the work of board certification shouldn't be limited to people who decide to become candidates, that there's a lot about the learning that happens when you go through the process of board certification by studying your standards and the 5 core propositions and the architecture of accomplished teaching, and that a lot of those practices could be used to support all teachers, and that this is something that should really be embedded into the fabric of schools about how we support educators and how we prepare educators. So I work on that grant right now, and we have 2 pilot districts this year in Kentucky. We work with Floyd and Oldham a lot, and we're adding 4 more districts that were just announced. Bullitt, Lee, Spencer, and Washington counties are going to be added to that work. And then we do a lot of work with other schools and districts too. So Holly who's also on the call. I'll let her introduce herself, but she has many hats that she wears that are helpful with this work. And one of them is that each state that has the grant with National Board is required to have a board certified teacher that's still in the classroom full time to work as an advisor for us, so that any of the decisions that we make as a state are still grounded by classroom teachers. And so Holly serves on my grant as my National Board Certified Teacher Advisor. So I'll mute and let Holly introduce herself too.
Hi, we're excited to have everybody on here today. If you haven't had a chance to check out some of the other webinars that we've done, you might go to the NT3 website and look at those. They might be helpful to you. And give us some feedback on those. We're always trying to improve what we're doing to help candidates. My name is Holly Bloodworth, and I certified in 2002 as an early childhood generalist and renewed in 2012, so I'm good till 22. I work at Murray Elementary School in the far western part of the state. I am a literacy teacher, and I work in the library and teach drama. So I have a really cool job that I love. And I love working with this work. And I also help KEA with some of their jump starts and those kinds of things. And then one thing that I want you all to know about is our National Board Network. The Kentucky National Board Network is up, and we have our board of directors, and now we have a banking account. I mean, we are really moving. We're getting this thing going. So we look forward to you all joining that network. You can join as a candidate, but you can join as an NBCT or just a supporter. So looking forward to working with you all in the future too. So nice to see you all or meet you all.
All right. Sorry, I went ahead and stopped my share so that we can switch to what Kate's going to be doing, and I'll let her take over from here. I'm going to turn off my camera, and Kate, reach out if there's anything I can do to help.
Okay. So like Suzanne said, she and Holly are going to be monitoring the chat window. I'm going to focus on the PowerPoint that I created. So please feel free to put things in the chat window. Understand that I probably won't see them, but Suzanne and Holly will either yell and interrupt me, or hopefully they can answer your questions as we go. So I'm going to try. Let's see if I can do this. All right, can you guys see that? Yes, we all can.
Yes, I can see that. And I wanted to mention too, if anybody's ever having problems with their screen and viewing what Kate has, if it seems like some things are cut off, one of the options you have in your toolbar is a viewing option, and you can choose for it to fit the screen. And that way you'll see everything.
Awesome. Okay, so this PD I like to call writing the NBCT way, and it's all about putting yourself on paper. And this is just a quick look at our agenda. We've already really done some welcome stuff, but I just wanted to make sure that you knew who I was. We're going to talk about resume writing. We're going to look at an example. We're going to talk about the commandment. We're going to talk about the 3 kinds of NBCT writing. And then we're going to end. Sometimes people have questions about writer's block. So we'll end with a few comments about that, and then just other more nitty-gritty tips and tricks. Okay, so as we mentioned, this is who I am. I do work for KDE, but before this, I was in a classroom for over a decade, and then I went to work for a district and was an instructional and content or curriculum coach for a while, and now I'm at KDE. And I have been a CSP from 2009 to 2016. So I want to start with this, and this is going to be an interactive webinar, so hope you have a pen handy. For our activity, our first activity, you don't really need anything special, but grab a Post-it note, grab the back of a receipt, the back of an envelope, don't really care, doesn't matter. Grab something, and and a pencil or a pen or a lipstick, doesn't matter. I want to talk for a second about resume writing. This is one of the things that is really hard for teachers to get over this first hurdle, okay? So I am going to tell you about my very first actual, real, honest-to-God job in which I got a paycheck. In 1997, I was a page at the Dunwoody Public Library. I was an English teacher by trade, and anyone who knows me knows that I love to read, so this was not a shock. I'm a huge nerd, so this is not a shocking first choice as a job. You know, I went to where my people were, and it was the library. So I was a page, that was my title at the Dunwoody Public Library. Dunwoody is right outside Atlanta. And I had 3 main jobs. And I loved this job because, you know, books, what's not to love? But also, you know, it was a pretty terrible job. Let's be honest. It was pretty miserable, right? So the main thing I did was I shelved books. I shelved books for hours on end. I mean, it's really all I did. I got very good at the Dewey Decimal System. I can alphabetize like you would not believe now, thanks to this job. I literally, for like 4 hours a day, I would just shelve books. I also assisted the librarian, which is not even as exotic as it sounds. I mean, literally, I would, you know, answer the phone, take out the mail, things of this nature. And then I also schlepped chairs and things. We had 2 big community rooms that people, organizations, whatever, could rent out. So I moved a lot of furniture. I moved tables in, I moved tables out, I vacuumed, I cleaned up after people, I moved tables, you know, into a T shape, into a U shape, whatever. It's all very, very glamorous, as I'm sure you can tell. So this is the reality of what I did. I want you, and yes, I'm going to pause and I'm going to make you actually do it. So get that receipt, get that Post-it note, get a pencil. I want you to write down what your first job ever, your first real job, whatever it was. And yes, babysitting counts because you got paid for it. Mowing yards counts if you got paid for it. Whatever it was the first thing you did that was regular and you got paid for. I want you to write down that job. And then I want you to write down, you know, don't pick 100 things, but like 2, 3, 4 things that were your responsibility. What did you do as a part of this job? And I mean, let's be honest here, right? If you're a babysitter, you changed a lot of diapers. You cleaned up a lot of food that toddlers threw on the floor. There was a lot of spaghetti in your hair. This is the reality of babysitting, right? You watched a lot of Barney if it was that time period. So what did you do for your first job? Write it down. Okay, we got some? Yes. Okay. So now what I would like you to do is I want to show you the difference when we talk about how you would put that on a resume. Whatever you have written down is not how you want to put that job on your resume. Not because it's not true, but because it just doesn't sound very good. All right. So this is the reality of my job at the Dunwoody Public Library, but that's not how I would put it. I would write it like this. I facilitated community engagement. I sure did. Every time I moved a stupid table, every time I cleaned up after the Red Cross doing their first aid training, that was community engagement. Sure was. I managed the heck out of some resources. I managed inventory and calendars. I, set up people's, I didn't, of course, make work schedules, but, when so-and-so called in and said they couldn't come, I was the one who had to handle that. So yeah, I managed calendars and all that shelving, that's managing resources and managing inventory. When I had to go out back to that place where the people dump all those books and the books end up actually in the bushes, that's managing inventory. And I assisted the head librarian with programming. And what that means is, again, did I ever get to be the fun lady in the dress-up hat for story time? I did not. But did I get to move all the tables and clean up after story time? I did. And on occasion, she let me make photocopies for it and get out all the puppets. Didn't get to use the puppets, but I got them out. That was being an assistant. I assisted the head librarian with programming. All of this is real. None of this is a lie. This is not about making things up. It's about taking what is true and making it sound more responsible, more impressive, because it doesn't look very glamorous, but I did, in fact, work my tail off at the Dunwoody Public Library. So if I turned shelved books, assisted librarian, set up public spaces for community meetings and events into facilitated community engagement, managed resources, inventory, and calendars, and assisted head librarian with programming, what can you turn yours into? What can you take those verbs, instead of shelved books, say managed resources, work with the verb and see how you can turn your first job into something that is still honest, but much more impressive and something that would make me want to hire you or your 16-year-old self, whoever it was. Go. Okay. If we have a couple, here's what I want. We're going to play a fun little game here. I want you in the chat box, and Suzanne and Holly can play our game show contestant hosts, or you're the contestants, they can play the host. I want a couple people, if you're willing, to put the new and improved impressive version of these jobs in the chat box, and we are going to see if we can guess what you actually did. All right? So, someone's got to go first. Be brave. You can do it. Ooh, okay, excellent, got some good ones.
Okay, I think maybe the Facilitate Community Baseball Complex event is like taking tickets or working at the hot dog stand.
Like it. Managed, maintained a collection of print and non-print materials. That person also could have worked in a library. Ooh, provided outstanding customer service. That's a classic.
I gotta know, Lucy. Created popular sweet treats, maintained large machines and kept them running smoothly, provided outstanding customer service to the community.
Did you work at a carnival?
You worked at a Dairy Queen or something.
Oh, Dairy Queen.
That's
excellent.
Awesome. That's awesome. Did you get good at the upside down scoop thing? You know, like where you have to dip the, yeah, you did.
The blizzard, absolutely. Okay, so Jennifer maintained a collection of print and non-print materials.
Again, I feel like that is similar, that's like a fellow librarian, but.
It could be, but the non-print makes me wonder. Is that like, okay, yeah.
Library assistant.
I was wondering maybe if it was like, video warehouse or something.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, libraries are.
Was the managed court files? Were you?
Let's go back to that one. Managed court. Were you a clerk, maybe, like in a courthouse?
Daycare worker.
A clean and healthy environment. Oh, I do like in keeping with parent expectations. That's nice. That's
Yes,
nice.
this is a nice touch.
It is. Okay, Tanya says, I was the assistant city clerk. I evolved into the assistant court clerk for the city. All right.
Wow, that sounds fancy.
It does. We could totally fancy that one up, Tanya. All right. What happened to facilitate community baseball complex events? Was that
I had guessed it could have been like the
you were thinking ticket taker.
concessions or tickets. Something.
Yeah. Or it could be like the custodian, right? Facilitate. Well, maybe that's more like maintain clean spaces. Unclear. Okay.
Oh, books for games. There you go.
I like it. Okay. So, other than this being a fun game, responsible for detaching.
Detaching tassels. Did you work in a strip bar?
I was going to say, is that a family-friendly webinar?
Oh, got it.
Clearly what I was thinking, Holly. I don't know what you were thinking. Obviously.
Yeah, you totally did that on purpose.
Well played.
Get somebody's attention on a resume for sure.
It really would. Okay, so other than the very enjoyable tassel extravaganza that we've just had, what is the purpose? What is the point to all of this? When we are writing a resume, we can get into the mindset of, I need to do these things. I need to take what I did. And again, it's not about making things up. It's not about embellishing. It's just using different language to make it sound more impressive. Because again, all of you, no matter what you did, you worked really hard at it. And I'm not saying, let's be very clear, I was shelving books. I was not curing cancer. But I worked really hard. And I want people to acknowledge that, or at least to understand it, all right? We know that makes sense to us when we are writing a resume. But for some reason, when we talk about ourselves as teachers, that lesson does not translate. When I hear teachers talk about themselves, and especially when I hear candidates talk about themselves, we completely forget every rule that we've ever learned in terms of writing a resume, which makes sense, right? Teachers are trained to think collaboratively. We are trained to make it about the kids. It's not about us. And in fact, I would argue that the people who are the best at making it not about themselves are the people who are the most likely to become candidates. So it's a really clear line between the people who are group, student-centered, team-oriented, and the people who I think are most likely to become candidates. The problem is that all of those characteristics that make you most likely to become a candidate are the characteristics that are going to make you shoot yourself in the foot. When it comes to national boards, you have to, this is going to sound crazy, and I hate that this is on recording because I'm going to go down in history as being heard saying this. When it comes to national boards, you have to stop making it about everybody else, and you have to make it about you. Of all the moments in your life, this is the moment to be selfish, okay? When you talk about collaboration, when you talk about teamwork, when you talk all of these things, you have to come from a place of I. And as a teacher, we often talk about a place of we. Well, you know, my team did this, my team did that. That's BS. Who stayed after school on a Friday until 5 o'clock filling out all those stupid field trip forms? You did. But the way you talk about it is, well, my team collaborated to put these forms together. That's not true. You did that. So we have to train ourselves out of traditional teacher collaboration mindset and into resume, okay? So that's the first lesson of how to put yourself on paper in a way that is good for national boards is everything you're writing from now on has to look and sound like your resume. This is not about sharing the glory with your collaborating teacher or with your team leader or with whoever. All right. We're not trying to, pretend that they didn't do anything here, but national boards, this process is not about them. It's about you. What did you do? How did you make things better for kids? All right. So that's the first goal. All right. So having said that, we're going to move on and we're going to look at actual, honest God, national board writing. With a catch. This was never turned in for national boards, all right? That would be very, very sketchy and illegal of me to show you. I am not actually showing you someone's portfolio. I am showing you a draft that never went anywhere, that one of my candidates years ago wrote and gave me and is letting me use very graciously to work with other candidates. Okay, so that's the first thing that you need to know, is that I'm not showing you anything sketchy or anything illegal, I promise. But what Suzanne sent you, and I'll put it up in just one second, is, and you can see this is a slide which doesn't really necessarily, doesn't necessarily work for virtual, but I'm gonna tell you how we're gonna do this, okay? Because this is how I do it when we're in person. So this is Elizabeth's draft, and that's what Suzanne sent you. And I'm also going to put it up on my screen in a second. I want you to read through it, and I want to hear what are your thoughts. And I wrote on here, annotate the essay, highlight it, mark all over it. I know you can't do that unless you have, if you've printed it out, then definitely go for it. But you can also use the review feature to make notes to yourself, just, in Word. And what we have, it says share with a partner, share with your table. Suzanne is actually going to put you into rooms. She can do breakout rooms, which is very cool that Zoom does. So Suzanne's going to put you in breakout rooms so that you can talk to other people about what you see in Elizabeth's draft. Okay. And that's all the direction I'm going to give you. I'm not telling you specifically what to look for, just what are your thoughts? What do you see? What do you think? What would you tell Elizabeth? Okay. So I'm going to share something else. I'm going to share this. Okay, so this is the share. And Suzanne, if you will split people into rooms.
Okay. How many do you want in a room?
It looks like
we've got 38 people.
I feel like
and if people are on the phone, I don't think, if they're on phone only, I don't think it'll work. So
right.
If they're on the phone only, they're going to need to probably just or it might work, I'm not sure. But okay, so do you want to do like 4 or 5?
Yeah, I'm thinking like 3 or 4, but I mean, it might be 4 in case people are on phones, and so it won't work.
Okay, so I'm going to create the rooms. And how long are we going to?
Let's take maybe 5 minutes.
Okay. And I wanted to let everybody know that you'll get a warning. You don't really have to watch the clock because it'll give you a 1-minute warning before it's time to come back. And then we'll come back. So you will get a warning. All right.
Awesome. Thanks, Susie.
Mm-hmm. And I just realized, Kate, it's gonna move up. It has you, me, and Holly.
That's okay.
Same room. I'm gonna move. Crystal, okay, wait. Can you hear me, Kate?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things I can see on here is I can see who's joined.
A breakout room.
There's a lot of people that are saying have not joined. And I can also join any of them and like pop in and see how they're doing. Some of them only have 2 people that have joined. But every one of them except, I need to move Holly.
Do you see Alicia says, how do we join a breakout room?
No, that's a good question, Alicia.
Hmm.
Is there anything that popped up on your screen?
Yeah.
What did it look like for you, Kate?
It was a just a pop-up window that said you've been invited to join a breakout room.
And it didn't pop up for you, Alicia? Okay, so some people are not getting those pop-ups. I wonder if it has to do with like a pop-up blocker.
Oh. Could be.
You know what, guys? Those of you that are left in this room can talk to each other and ignore me and Kate. And I'll mute myself.
I'll mute myself too.
Did you see that, Kate? They want you to put the writing back up.
She talked about identifying areas for improvement, but did she really elaborate on what that was? Okay, well, we did not do a very good job.
Okay, we should have everybody back now. And if you had any problems figuring out or navigating that situation, or you were hindered by technology, I had some people texting to me that they were having some problems, and it's going to be okay because Kate's going to walk us through this together and we'll have a conversation together. So, thanks. You're muted, Kate. You want to start that again?
Yeah, sorry. Aren't I so good at technology, guys? All right, here's what I was trying to say. I am gonna take I'm gonna spew all over this in a minute, but before we do that, I wanted to see, get some feedback from you guys. There were a couple people who stayed in this group session in the large group room who I got to see what you were thinking, but what else? And feel free we're just gonna take a minute maybe or two and do this, but feel free to just, kind of yell out some things. What did you see? What did you notice?
Mommy, Daddy wants to look at my battle scars.
What do you think?
Yes, I was still peeling off bandage.
Okay. Molly says it was way too general. Okay, too many passive verbs. We have. All right, you can't see the teacher with a comment. Oh, okay. We have one, it reads more like a narrative.
And if anybody wants to grab the mic rather than type in the chat box, or if you're having problems with your chat or can't access that, or you're on the phone, feel free to grab the mic and talk or unmute.
We had talked about how she could have made herself sound like more of an active participant rather than just someone who sat in on a meeting, because we've all been in meetings like that where you've just sat, and it doesn't sound that special. She talks about homework that she does, but she doesn't really describe the type of attention she's giving it in her free time.
Right. Okay. All right. So, hang on there. Here's a suggestion. Tanya says, Tanya is suggesting that Elizabeth rewrite it as, quote, I analyzed student work samples and created a plan to implement individual learning targets. All right. So I am going to share with you my thinking on this. But before I do, I want to talk to you for just a second, especially this is being recorded for posterity, about what do I mean when I say the Grindon Way? Well, I mean the Grindon Way because that's all this is. I this whole PD, this session, and what I'm about to tell you is just advice. And this is not official NBCT information. I've never scored these things in my life. In a sense, I have no idea what I'm talking about here. I want to be really clear that this is not like insider trading, all right? I don't know anything special. This is just me having watched a lot of candidates go through this process, as well as having been a candidate myself, knowing where I struggled, knowing how I scored and the way I did things, and where I didn't do so well, and vice versa, where I did okay. So this is not officially sanctioned information. This is just my lived experience. But I will tell you, I have a lot of lived experience in this area. I've seen a lot of candidates go through. Your CSP, as many of you know, cannot tell you a whole lot. Your CSP's job is not to write your portfolio for you. Your CSP's job is to ask you questions. And in a sense, now that the reason I can do this PD now is because I am no longer a CSP. I am not yours. This is not official CSP advice. This, however, is probably what is going through your CSP's head while he or she reads your entries. By the way, I know we call them components now. I just can't mentally make the leap. I still call them entries. I try really hard to stop myself, but man, that's a mental block. So please forgive me if I talk about an entry. I mean component. I just can't make the word come out sometimes. So my bad. So when I talk about the Grindon Way, sometimes what I mean is this is probably what your CSP is thinking. She's just not allowed to say it out loud. We are under very, very strict constraints as CSPs and as NBCTs in general. We are not allowed to show anyone ever what we did. And candidates ask all the time, well, what did you do for this? Can I see yours? Nope, you cannot. In fact, if we show you anything, then not only will they come after my national board certification, they will come after my certification. And I don't want that. So your CSP is really only allowed to ask you clarifying questions like, that's interesting, what did you mean by this? Or can you tell us more about that? Or do you think that you're showing the information that is most needed by this question? Sometimes that's infuriating and you want to put your hands on your CSP and say, that's not helpful. I get that. So that's what this, in some sense, that's what this advice is I'm letting you see into my brain so you can see what I'm thinking, even though I'm not allowed to say it out loud. This is what I'm thinking, all right? And then ultimately the goal is for you to get inside my head. When I had all those years that I had candidates, the goal was not for me to destroy their writing and, bleed all over it and rip it apart. My goal, because I wasn't allowed to do that, my goal was to really indoctrinate my candidates so that they would have my voice in their head. Because who can bleed all over a document and rip it apart and destroy it is another candidate. So that was always my mission. My mission was to brainwash them into thinking the things that I was thinking. And so I never even had to say it. I would read it and I would hand it to a different candidate and I would say, well, what do you think? And the candidate would channel me and say, well, here's what Grindon's thinking. And she would go nuts. And I never said a word. And so that's the goal because I'm not allowed to say a word. All right. So don't be annoyed at your CSP if your CSP won't do what I'm about to do to Elizabeth. All right. They can't. No matter how annoyed you get, they can't do it. My goal is I'm going to train you and I'm going to get inside your head and I'm going to brainwash you and then you can do it to everyone else and you can also do it to yourself. All right. So that's the goal. All right. You ready? Let's destroy sweet, sweet Elizabeth, who did certify, by the way. She's fine. All right. But first I got to share. I got to find her. All right, so going to draw. All right. Oh, also I'm doing this, I'm drawing using my trackpad, so it's about to get really kind of messy to watch. Sorry. Last summer, I attended a 4-day professional development workshop. The workshop was held in a neighboring city. Oh, I don't care about any of this. I don't care how long it was. I don't care where it was. It involved 6 hours of training each. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care. Additional work to be completed each night. I don't care. As someone even mentioned, I don't care about your homework. I really don't care about your homework. I don't care. Okay. During the workshop, national leaders in literacy spoke to us about the importance of student engagement with reading. We also, hang on, I'm gonna see if I can turn it red. We also got to experience many of the activities, we would be using with our students. I don't care about any of that. None of that has anything to do with your, nope. Really don't care. After attending the thought-provoking workshop, really? All right, this is something that one of my professors in college used to tell me. Adverbs got to go, especially if you're desperate for space. Thought-provoking workshop, no one cares. Student work samples were analyzed. Student work samples were analyzed. I'm going to do, I don't know what I'm doing here. Never mind. Were analyzed. Okay, someone mentioned it. That is passive voice. All right, now here's what I have to say about that. Okay, I call this poof. And here's why I say poof. Student work samples were analyzed makes it sound like you left one night and the magic teaching elves came into your classroom while no one was watching and they analyzed some stuff. And in the meantime, they cobbled you shoes, and aren't they cute? All right, there is no magic elf. Magic is not real. I'm so terribly sorry for all the Harry Potter fans out there. Real world magical elves don't exist. My apologies to Dobby. You analyzed. Ugh. And areas for improvement were identified. Nope. Still no. A plan was made. No. Poof. That it allowed for implementation of individualized learning target. Wait, what? That allowed for, come on. I don't know what that means. Plan was made that allow for implementation of individualized learning targets. That's not a sentence. Reading and writing was taught as one comprehensive unit. Okay, first of all, that's a weirdly constructed sentence. Second of all, reading and writing being taught as one comprehensive unit. If you're not an English teacher, this is not quite so egregious, but that is not new. That is not rocket science. That's how reading and writing are supposed to be taught. You don't get points for, teaching the way you're supposed to teach. No one's impressed by that. I'm sarcastic and mean, by the way. Can't you tell? I swear I was very nice to Elizabeth in person. I promise you. I'm not this horrible. This is just what's in my head. Differentiated mini craft lessons were taught to students. Oh, she's killing me with the passive voice. Poof. Okay, differentiated mini craft lessons. I also don't know what that means. About what? She has yet, by the way, yet to mention a single strategy or yet to talk about actually what this looks like in her classroom in terms of kids or what she did. I can't see anything. I enjoyed creating these lessons. Oh yeah, that's delightful, but I don't really care. Nope, don't care. And the lessons were also well received by students. Oh, this is a problem because I know you can't see that, or that doesn't look like a little circle, but what does that mean? What does it mean for the lessons were also well received by students? How do you know? They sat there and were quiet. They didn't tell you to go jump off a cliff. I mean, you know, I've been told some pretty horrible things by children in my decade in the classroom. No one said something inappropriate to you. That does not mean it was well received by students. Also, I just don't know what that means or how that connects to your differentiated mini craft lessons. All right. After 3 weeks of implementation and collecting anecdotal notes and assessments, student scores increased in the areas of comprehension and on-task behavior. Okay, first of all, we're missing a word here. And in on-task behaviors and increase in student scores were noted. But we've got two different, this is so confusing. All right, 3 weeks of implementation. What did you implement? Collecting anecdotes and assessments. Would you care to share any of those assessments, perhaps? Student scores increase in the areas of comprehension. That's like the vaguest thing you possibly could have told me. And on-task behaviors and increase. Okay, you didn't say at the outset that your goal was to increase on-task behaviors. Also, what are those on-task behaviors? What were the off-task behaviors we were trying to correct? What the heck is this increase that you're so magically impressed with? Was noted as also past tense while we're here. My students were beginning to become active readers, and participation in authentic book talks were on the rise. That is edu-jargon babble if I ever heard it, and none of it means anything because it's all so very vague. The 4-day professional development, again, I really don't care how long this is, also addressed an issue that was present within my classroom. Oh, maybe we're going to talk about her actual kids, perhaps. Students not sustaining with a book to complete. Okay, first of all, sustaining with a book is not a thing, but whatever, I'm being picky now, I'm an English teacher. Students not sustaining with a book to completion. This was very concerning to me as my passion is to instill a lifelong love for reading into my students. I know, that's not, I don't know what to do with that. Listen, I'm an English teacher, right? My first job, for God's sakes, was at the Dunwoody Public Library. I'm your girl in terms of lifelong passion in reading. But that's not a thing. I can't measure that. And I also can't show that it wasn't there and now that it is. All right, how can my students love to learn to love reading if they never finish a book? No one has time. Ain't nobody got time for rhetorical questions. Ain't nobody got time for that. To foster love of literature, now we've said that 3 times, I think, I use the strategies and models presented. I think someone mentioned this earlier. I would give $100 for you to actually name a strategy or model that was presented. You haven't told me any of that. Analyzed my own classroom needs. You haven't told me what that was either, by the way. And a 3-week implementation, you're just literally repeating the same words you've already used. The end of implementation, students were more enthusiastic and engaged when reading. Again, you said that in the second paragraph. It still is not impressive to me. Reading comprehension scores had also improved by 6%. Oh, okay, hang on. For the record, that is a little shady because I don't know what this means. Like, what's a comprehension score and what from where to where? You know, what's the 6%? But I will let her keep that because it's an actual quantifiable thing. Your kids got better and we know how much. So I'll let you keep it. This was very exciting to me. Oh, now we're back. We're back to not caring. I mean, me not caring. Results were shared, passive, poof, again, with the administration in my building. From this, administration asked me to lead a professional development. Okay, this is killing me. Administration, I've been in a lot of buildings and a lot of administrations, and I've worked for a lot of good people, and some not so great ones, but a lot of really good people. Even my best principal ever, who is all about building capacity and looking for ways to make teachers into leaders. Do you know how many times that nice man asked me to lead a professional development for staff in my building? Maybe once in like the 5 or 6 years that I worked for him. Administrations don't often do that because they're doing other things. Now that's a whole different side issue as to whether or not they should. But I would bet good money, also because I know Elizabeth, I would bet good money that that's a lie. Her administration didn't ask her to do anything. She walked into her principal's office and said, listen, this appears to be working. Do you mind if I take over part of the faculty meeting next Thursday? And the principal said, okay, great. I bet money that's how that happened. So why are we writing it as if it was her principal's idea? Take ownership. Take ownership. Getting rid of all of this. Now this is a pet peeve of mine. Turning my learning into a leader opportunity. We see this a lot. Now, component 4 is new, and so we're still figuring out all the ways that there are pitfalls in here. But in this one way, component 4 is very similar to the old entry 4. It's asking you to do a couple different things at the same time, right? Component 4 asks you to do multiple things. You cannot magically scooch together 2 different things in one sentence and say, look, I did them all. If you want to talk about being a leader, then you have to stop what you're doing and talk about being a leader and show me in the same way that you showed me for your kids. Here was a need in my building. Here's how I know it's a need in my building. Here's what I did. Here's how I know whether or not it worked. You cannot just say, and then poof, look, I'm a leader. That's not a thing. Okay? So sweet, poor little Elizabeth, after all of this, I don't know, she gets to keep like 3 sentences, maybe, if I'm feeling generous. So, I hope I haven't like terrified everyone, made you all go running. Going back to this. These are not things that I would ever actually say to Elizabeth, and that I would never take Elizabeth's paper and do that to it. I can't. I was a CSP. A CSP can't do that. But I'm telling you, that's what's in my head when I'm reading it. That whole thing that sweet Elizabeth worked so hard on, in my mind, is a whole lot of filler and a whole lot of nonsense. All right? So, now I'm going to show you, before we move on, or like, does anyone want to, I'm going to show you like what my commandments are to help you remember not to do these things. All right. But before we move on, just for like a minute, is anyone dying to say something?
All right. I will tell you this. Okay. Someone who doesn't have access to the chat box and is having a hard time, texted me and said that knows my number and was talking about how much you were cracking her up. So I did want to tell you that because I know you are really worried that people would think you're a horrible, mean person.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, either we're all completely on board with this or I just terrified 38 people into silence, which I mean, you know.
Well, and Tanya is saying, she's like, I'm sure that my my CSP thought that first one would mine.
No.
Tanya, don't be terrified. And yes. So I think one of the things that I can tell you that, and I'm sure Holly will agree, and I know Kate agrees with this statement too, is that there's really no way to write the way Kate is talking to you about in your first draft.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something you go through, and you have to have something written to be able to revise.
Yes.
And it is a new kind of writing, and so really don't be hard on yourselves. Everyone that has board certified has written a draft that looks like Elizabeth's.
Exactly. You have to write that. You have to get it out of your system, and then you can look at it and say, wow, that's really terrible. And then you can move on. Okay.
And I'm sorry. I love that Tanya said terrifyingly entertaining.
And Molly said it was all about some tough love. I think that's good too.
Yes, it is. Your CSPs love you and want the best for you, even when that means they want to shake you. All right. So now we're going to talk, I'm going to show you a couple, I have just a handful of commandments that will put these specific things into the forefront and make them clear and might give you some guidance in terms of revising your own. Like Suzanne said, this is not about avoiding the Elizabeth draft. You really can't avoid the Elizabeth draft. That's okay. Just come to peace with it, accept that you're going to write some crappy stuff. It's okay. The real trick is once you have written the terrible Elizabeth draft, how do you make it better? Okay. So I'm going to give you some commandments that are my advice for how you make that better. Okay. So here are the NBCT writing commandments according to Grindon. Okay. The first is, I love this photo. When crossing the Delaware, look at this. Look at this photo. Who does your eye go to in this photo? It goes to Washington. What is George Washington actually doing in this photo? Nothing. Not a darn thing. In fact, anyone who's ever done any amount of boating in what looks to be very treacherous and cold waters knows that he's doing the number one thing that is dangerous and stupid. You never stand up in a boat, right? It makes you wonder, like, has George Washington ever been at sea before? Perhaps not. But I love this photo because this exemplifies what I'm trying to say here is you have to be Washington. You have to look commanding. You have to say that you're the one in charge. Do not be the guy in the back of the boat. Look at that poor guy. You know he's going to get wet. He's turned the wrong way, just trying to figure out where on earth Washington is going. You can see the thought bubble is, where are we going, man? What are you doing? Desperately trying to like rudder and oar so that they don't crash. The guy in green in the back of the boat and these two guys in the front in green, it's all the guys in green. The guys in green, they're the ones doing all the work. But who is taking credit? Washington. The name of this picture is Washington Crossing the Delaware, right? The name of this picture is not Patrick Jones also crossing the Delaware. No one cares. No one cares about the guy in the back of the boat. When you are crossing the Delaware, thou shalt be Washington. Thou shalt not be the guy in the back of the boat. All right? You have to be the leader. You have to put yourself in front, even if you're not always the one doing the grunt work. Okay. So the next thing is thou shalt not use magic. And this came up when we were looking at Elizabeth's, right? Poof. Nothing happens by magic. Students do things, they say things, and they learn things only because of something specific that you did first. Nothing in your room happens by magic, all right? No kid genuinely knows how to have a discussion with another child in your classroom because they woke up on a Wednesday and thought, I'd like to have an intellectual discourse today. No, that's not a thing. You made that happen. So take ownership over it. So let me give you an example. Students chose their own independent reading books. That is not the way to say it. Due to my regular book talks and conferences with students, the user-friendly nature of my classroom library, and the many lessons on picking appropriate books at the beginning of the year, my students are comfortable choosing their own independent reading books. That paints a picture. That is Washington. That shows me that you are the one who has created this classroom environment. Okay? Now, I know the next thing you're going to say is, oh my gosh, who's got room and time and space for all that? Well, all that stuff where, as we get into in a minute, like there's going to be a lot of touchy-feely stuff maybe, if that's how you write, that's all got to go. All right? And you can't say things over and over and over again for the sake of saying things. And I know we're going to get into these questions that seem like they're asking the same thing. We're going to get into that, but you can't repeat yourself just for the sake of repeating yourself. You've got to make room for this kind of stuff because this is the good stuff. All right? Okay. The next thing, thou shalt not use passive voice. Okay. So passive voice leads to magic. Passive voice leads to coincidence. Worksheets are used to organize the students' thoughts. Students use worksheets to organize their thoughts. Or even better, I created worksheets for students to use to organize their thoughts. That's even better. Okay? If you are not naturally good at figuring out when you have used the passive rule, some people are not naturally good at that, that's fine. Use the zombie rule if you need to. All right, whoa, sorry, I thought it was, okay, the zombie rule, I will explain the zombie rule. If you can read a sentence and it makes sense to say by zombies at the end, then you have used passive voice. So an example of that is formative assessments were analyzed. Okay, that's passive voice. And because it makes sense to say formative assessments were analyzed by zombies. So if you could put by zombies at the end, you have accidentally used the passive voice. All right. Now, if you say I analyzed formative assessments, then you can't say I analyzed formative assessments by zombies. That doesn't make any sense. So you know that that's active voice. That's the zombie rule. All right. Okay. This is tricky often, particularly for us English teachers. Thou shalt not be conversational or friendly. I know that sounds mean, and I'm not trying to be mean. I'm just trying to be practical here. Just the facts. Remember, like Dragnet in the good old days? Just the facts, ma'am. You need to sound detached. You need to sound objective. You need to think like a PR rep. All right. Imagine you are a politician giving a soundbite to a newspaper. Do not be friendly or flowery. This is, I think I might have even quoted this from Elizabeth. Helping students find good books is one of my passions. I don't care. Oh, this, God bless her. This did not come from Elizabeth, but this came from a real component entry that I saw once. Welcome to my second grade classroom. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just that if you want to have space to do the stuff I talked about 2 slides back, you don't have time for this. All right. The problem is we assume that this is how you should write because you're trying to invite people in to paint a picture. You're not painting a picture. All right. I will say that there is in working with a lot of candidates, there's the impression out there that English teachers have an easier time with their national boards than other content areas because they are writers by trade. For some people, that's true. But let me tell you, I was an English teacher. I mean, I am an English teacher. This was so much harder for me than it was for my best friend, who is a science teacher. And she and I certified together, and then we renewed together. And both times, this was way easier for her. And she actually ended up scoring better than I did because she thinks and writes like a scientist. Right? So she gets in there, she says it, and then she shuts up. I, as I'm sure you're all shocked to learn, could go on and on for 4 pages. We used to sit in Panera on Saturday mornings, and she would take a red pen and take my pages, and she would X through whole paragraphs. Not even lines, just whole paragraphs. And of course, this is, I'm like weeping here in the Panera. And she would look at me and she would say, Kate, no one cares. This is heartbreaking. But of course she was right. So if you think I'm not necessarily good at this because I'm not a good writer or I'm not an English teacher, I don't know how to communicate, you might be surprised. It might be better for, if you think I'm a math person, I'm more analytical, you might be way off. You might be easier. So I just want to say that, don't be freaked out if you think I'm not a writer. Sometimes being a writer, for me being a writer, man, I had 28 pages that Amy had to cut down. It was not pretty. There were a lot of tears in that Panera. All right. So here's how you should say it instead. This is just an example. I provide reflection time each day for students to self-assess their progress on the learning target. right? So we're not saying how it makes you feel. We're not saying how wonderful this is. We're very, very objectively saying what you do in your classroom with your children. I provide reflection time each day. Okay. This is also this is a tricky one for some people, right? We get sucked in. Thou shalt not make negative or generalized statements. I added this one after seeing this happen more and more on candidates writing. No one likes a Debbie Downer, right? We want you to be honest. We want you to paint us a real picture about what's happening in your classroom. But if you paint us a picture of the apocalypse, that's not going to make us feel very confident about what's happening in your classroom. So, for example, right, here's an example. This class has more behavior problems than my other classes, and this creates gaps in my instruction. Honestly, of course, we are all teachers, and we all know that different classes have different personalities, have different behavior issues. So we get it. However, when you say it this way, this creates gaps in my instruction, I don't think about those kids. What it makes me think of is you, right? If it's creating gaps in your instruction, then you need to plan your instruction differently. So be aware that sometimes when you think you're just telling, here's the story of my fourth period, sometimes that comes across as, I can't handle my fourth period. And that's not the message you're trying to send if you're trying to be Washington crossing the Delaware. Okay? So instead, consider saying something like this. This class responds better to short activities involving movement than to long periods of independent work. I mean, I would say that that's generally true, right? Kids who are more squirrely do, in fact, do better with multiple short activities. In fact, who are we kidding? All kids, right? Kids don't have huge attention spans. So emphasize that, emphasize your knowledge of your craft and what you are doing to make sure that all kids have the best experience, rather than focusing on my fifth period's behavior is terrible. Okay? Don't make sweeping statements that are either impossible to prove or that are stereotypes. So this was an example I saw once. Many students in this class come from single parent homes, so parent engagement is lacking. That is quite an assumption to make. It's quite a general statement. The reality is, you probably don't know that is why parent engagement is lacking. You may know that many of your students come from single parent homes, and you may see a lack of parent engagement in the way that you are looking for it. So for instance, you may see only 5% of parents showing up on parent-teacher conference day, but that doesn't mean that that's a causal relationship. That doesn't mean that those parents don't care. Maybe it means that those parents are at work and can't physically get to parent-teacher conference day. The reality is, we don't know, and you're making generalizations. I can't say the word, generalizations, all right? It's not a good look. Don't be that girl. Instead, you can say something like this. Again, this is very objective and matter of fact. On our last parent-teacher conference day, 31 students were represented by their families out of 120. I am always looking for ways to increase family engagement. Okay, this is worlds better for a couple reasons. One, it just tells me you are not adding in your own bias about what this means. You're not adding judgment statements about your kids or their families. You're just reporting in numbers. And whoever is reading it can do math, right? We see, oh, wow, that's not very high in terms of a percentage. But it doesn't place blame or doesn't assume to know why that's true. It just states the fact. The other thing that it does is it doesn't make this sound like it's a lost cause. You've tried one or two things and now you're done, whatever, can't fix it. What you're saying is, I'm always looking for ways to increase family engagement. So this is the current status. I'm not giving up. I'm still working on this. This is still important to me. And this implies that by the end of the year, you're going to have increased family engagement. Maybe that doesn't show up in parent-teacher conference, but maybe it shows up in other ways. All right, that's a statement by someone who's still engaged, still working, right? That's a statement by national board teacher, not, what are you going to do? All right. Thou shalt ask the 2 essential questions. Why and so what? Everything that you are writing needs to ultimately be answering these 2 questions. Why did you do it? And so what? Okay. This is where you've got to get away from how it makes you feel or some of that flowery welcome stuff. That takes time and space away from why you did it and so what. Tell me specifically what are the situations in your classroom that caused you to do X, Y, and Z. Like for instance, in component 4, what are the needs of your kids? How do you know that? Why did you choose this one thing? And then the essential thing is so what? All right. So I did this. So what? Who cares? Right. And this is the question that you ask, or that your CSP is asking when I read about Elizabeth going to a 4-day conference in a nearby city. So what? If it doesn't link back to something that students are doing, if it doesn't link back to instruction and student improvement in your classroom, then I don't need to hear about it. I don't care. I don't care where you went. I don't care how it made you feel. So what? Tell me what the impact of this was on your kids. Now, I will say a note. I've talked about quantitative measures because that's the easiest and most obvious thing to talk about, right? It doesn't just have to be test scores. One of the things that one of my candidates a couple years ago really focused on and did some impressive work with was around attendance. So she noticed that her kids were not doing well, and she figured out, she looked at the whole big picture, and the why was her kids had terrible attendance. There was chronic tardiness. And so she really worked on that. And so that she did some community engagement stuff. She worked with her kids. This was a high school teacher. She worked with her kids, different incentives, different things. She structured her class period a little differently for her first period, structured it a little bit differently. And all of this was very clearly tied to the why, right? And then the so what was, here's the impact that it had. And when it came to that impact, she did not report test scores. What she did was she reported tardies and she reported absences. And she reported things like at the beginning of the semester, there was very little contact with parents in the morning. And by the end of the semester, not a ton of them, but she had 1 or 2 parents calling her, instead of the other way around, calling her because they wanted to check in and make sure their kid got to first period. I mean, that has nothing necessarily like directly linked to test scores, but man, that's a huge achievement. That is impact. That is student impact. So just a quick note, when they ask about student impact, it doesn't have to be, math achievement scores went up 6 points. It's student impact. And, we teach the whole kid, the whole child, and there are a lot of pieces to impact. It doesn't just have to be a score on a test. All right. So, how are we doing on time? Okay. What I'm going to say here is, I noticed earlier Tanya mentioned that I don't remember exactly what her quote was or her comment was in the chat, but she mentioned something about not having other teachers to do this with. So what I'm going to do, we're not actually going to have you put one up on the board and have everyone rip it apart. But what I'm going to pause for a moment here, is if you would like, I'm kind of shaming you into being a cohort and being good to each other, all right? Because I know that just like Tanya, there are other people out there who might be in areas where there aren't other MBCTs, or people who don't have really good access to CSPs, or people who aren't thinking like this. So I'm going to do a little public shaming, really. I'm not saying that's a effective technique, but here we go. I would like for you to put your, just in the chat, I would like for you to put your name and your email if you would be willing to be the voice in Grindon's head for someone else in this group. Okay, notice I'm not saying put your name in the chat box if you want your stuff ripped up. The only way it works is you have to volunteer to be a ripper before you can be a rippee, if that makes sense. So if you are willing to rip someone else's stuff in exchange for someone to rip yours, put your name and your email in the chat box. And then hopefully the people who are feeling alone in the world can reach out, and you can have we can have some collaboration and a cohort going that way. Okay, so I'm going to take like 1 or 2 minutes and wait and guilt trip all of you into putting your email addresses in the chat box. Let's see, we got some good ones. Oh, yay. Look, kids, guilt trips and public shaming works. Don't do that with your children. That's a terrible idea. I'm just saying.
That might be funny in an entry, right? So your component. So I guilt tripped my students and publicly shamed them. So that's a strategy.
No, not recommending that as not one of the commandments. The only thing that would make that better is after hearing the strategy recommended by Kay Grindon,
or using a zombie voice too, right? Use the passive voice too.
These are the moments when I think I'm gonna get fired somehow. I don't know how. I'm gonna get myself fired one of these days. Oh, all right. We move on.
Yes, I can save the chat, but at the end, I think that before each of you exits the meeting, one of the options you might have pop up on your screen is the ability to save the chat yourself too.
Oh, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so when you look at the right of your chat box, there's a more button with a caret on my screen. If you also have that, it's in blue at the bottom, like across from where you would type your message. There's a thing that comes up when you click on it that says Save Chat. So if you have that ability, that's another way that you can save those. I also know that Crystal Culp has created Outlook group chat groups for all of the candidates that are in the, I don't know, I think you have to be in the school email system to be able to do that, the public school system, I think, to be able to access that. And I think we have some people on in private schools, but if you're in that system and she's grouped you into your certificate area Outlook group, that's another place that you could prompt people to be willing to do this for you.
All right, are we ready? Move on. We're closing in on the end here. All right. So you might have heard about this before, but in the world of national boards, there are 3 basic kinds of writing, okay? The first is descriptive, and that's another way of saying what. All right, so this is when you tell me what happened. Analytical, I like to think of that as the why. And the reflective, I like to think of as so what. Okay, now in your components, there is a separate chunk where it'll say like, now spend 2 pages and, you know, write your reflection. That's not necessarily what I am talking about. I mean, yes, obviously you need to reflect in that official reflection, but you need to have reflective writing, that's so what writing, in the main body of your component itself. Don't just wait until you get to the official reflection part, okay? Now, I'm not sure, oh, I know how we're gonna do this. I'm gonna go back, because I do this thing with my arms, and you kind of have to see me do this. I look like an idiot, but it's fine. So you can see these little diagrams here, right? Before I take this off. So we've got triangles, you got some diamonds. All right, let me see if I can show you. All right, can you see me again? All right, so the problem is that often, for instance, Elizabeth's writing, okay, she had mostly descriptive, a little bit of analytical, and hardly any so what, okay? And that looks like this, okay? So it's top heavy, right? It's almost all description. If we made this into 3 chunks, it would be, the pyramid would be very top heavy on description. What she did, and that's the whole like, I spent 4 days, blah, 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 no one cares. And then the middle would be, you know, she's got a little bit of analytical, and then at the very bottom is the so what. Okay. Now, if you saw that other, the bow tie looking one, or the hourglass, I guess it's better to say the hourglass. If you see the hourglass one, if you've gone to any of the jump starts, KEA does a jump start session, which is great. They do a fantastic job. But they show you the hourglass photo, and they try to gear you towards that. And I think it's really good. Here's the issue in terms of practical that I have seen. When you are aiming for the hourglass, you still end up writing it like this. I don't know why. I don't know magically why you can't make yourself write the hourglass. But if you aim for the hourglass, you get this. And then sometimes people end up, they're like trying to overcompensate. And so they end up with that weird diamond where it's a ton of the Y. And that's weird too, right? That doesn't make nearly as much sense. So here's my advice. When you are writing, I want you to aim for this. All right, can you see my little triangle here? So up at the top, this is the what. This is the descriptive. I know that's really annoying. I'm saying you get like this much description, itty bitty, and then you get this much analysis. That's the why. And then you got to do this much so what. Aim for this, okay? Because the reality is you can't help yourself. And if you aim for this, then you're probably going to end up with that hourglass. But if you aim for the hourglass, or if you aim for this, you're going to get completely top heavy. And you want way more why and so what than you do what. Does that make sense? You got to really, really be bottom heavy on the so what, so that any of it comes through, because instinctively you can't help yourself. You're going to put way more what in there than you meant to. Now, the easiest way to figure out what shape you have, or if you've done it this way, is the classic 3 highlighter method. All right. So that's when you print your stuff out and you take 3, or the better way is to have someone else do this, honestly, because man, they'll be honest. You take 3 different color highlighters. Doesn't matter what color, you just assign them, you pick them. And then you say, okay, this is going to be, everything that is a description, so when it tells me what I did, I'm going to highlight that blue. And then everything that tells me why I did it, it's the analysis, I'm going to highlight that yellow. And everything that tells me so what, or when I reflect on that, I'm going to highlight that pink. And then you're literally going to highlight, and you're going to see how many lines, like what kind of volume you have that is highlighted blue and yellow and pink. And nothing makes it show up and say like, oh geez, I've got tons of description. I've got tons of what in there, like seeing that big block of blue all over those pages. So if you think that you can't quite get the triangles the right way, I really recommend those highlighters. Nothing jumps out like that. All right, I'm gonna go back and share my screen again. Maybe. All right. Okay, so the next thing is, often people talk to me about having writer's block, okay? And one of the issues, just like when you are writing anything else, I just want to point out, you don't have to start at the quote unquote beginning, all right? You can start anywhere. You can start with any one of their sections. You can start with any single one of those questions. If you are stuck on something, usually it's because for a lot of people, it's because they don't know how to start it. So if you are stuck, don't worry about starting it. Just answer the question, all right? And pick any question. Doesn't have to be the first one you see. Doesn't have to be the first one in the section. Just answer the question, all right? Now, answering the questions is the single easiest way to make sure you haven't forgotten anything. And a lot of the time, I even recommend my candidates, when you are typing, put the questions themselves in your document. I like to say, like, highlight them in a different color so that when we are reading, we can see where the question ends and where your answer begins. And also because that will help people who are reading your stuff know whether or not you've answered the question. However, as I think I was scrolling back to see the upper chat stuff earlier, as someone mentioned, some of these questions get really repetitive, or it seems like they're really repetitive, right? So how do you do the answering all of the questions and yet not being overly repetitive and having enough room to do all that Washington crossing the Delaware stuff? How do you have time for all that? My biggest piece of advice for this is, you're right, the questions can sound pretty repetitive. However, they're all under a different header, all right? So like, I'm gonna make this up and I'm not gonna remember, I'm really sorry. But for instance, you'll have questions under planning for instruction. And then you'll have what look like the same questions under analysis of instruction. I'm not even sure that's one of the titles, but it's something like that, right? When you see questions that seem like they're repetitive, think about the different headers that they are under and ask yourself, what is different about this header than the one before it? How is for instance, the scope and sequence of my unit? They asked me about that under planning for instruction, and now they're asking me about that again when I'm talking about analyzing actually analyzing the lesson. Why would they ask me that twice? If you ask yourself, why would they ask me that twice, and keep the headers in mind, then I think it becomes much more clear, because this time they wanted to see, here was your intention in that, and now they want to see, and here's how that actually falls under I've got 50 minutes, how did I make the choices that I made as I'm trying to be flexible and work with my kids during third period? Because I promise you, they're not being repetitive just for the sake of being repetitive. If they asked you the question twice, it's because they want two different sets of information here. So focus, if you're struggling with that, focus less on the question itself and focus more on the question in the context of that header, if that makes sense. And then the other piece of advice is, when you take the questions out, then you have to read it through as one narrative, and it needs to make logical sense as a narrative, all right? This is when it's really, really helpful to have someone else, not even another teacher, not even another candidate, just anyone else, your mailman, your mother, I don't care, read it to say, does this make logical sense as a narrative, all right? This is not an essay for English class, so you don't need the same kinds of transitions as you would as we were trained, when we were in high school. Here's how you write an essay. However, it does need to make logical sense. So we have to, get from one idea to the next. Like I said, this is when having a completely outside set of eyes really helps. I like to say that you need to have two different kinds of readers. One is you need someone else who's doing national boards, and in that sense, someone else who's in your own content area to be able to pinpoint and say, oh, wait, yes, but you forgot to talk about this. Or I think you were trying to say this, but you didn't say it this way. Or I can't believe you didn't mention that. They're going to have the really good ideas about your classroom. Incidentally, that doesn't have to be another candidate. It just has to be another person who is familiar with your content area. So don't stress if you can't find an NBCT or a candidate who is also teaching high school biology. Just find another high school biology teacher and say, does this sound legit to you? Do you think that I've talked about the things that we both know we do? But that's one kind of reader. The other kind of reader, someone totally removed from high school biology. So maybe if you happen to have a candidate who is a friend, maybe that is a second grade generalist candidate. That would be very helpful. Or like I said, maybe it's not a candidate at all. Doesn't matter. They're going to help you make sense of it and say, you're jumping all over the place. I don't know what you're talking about. If you are so focused on answering those questions, sometimes you can't see it, but your spouse can. The barista at Starbucks who's been very, very good to you as you sat there and cried and, spent all of your Saturdays and Sundays at the Starbucks, ask him or her to read it. He has a vested interest now. Okay. Okay, so some other just tips and tricks I've picked up throughout the years. I love the idea of going into the standards and making a verb and a phrase list. My candidates used to hate me, but those really huge Post-it notes, not the 3x3s or the 3x5s. I mean, I'm talking like the 5x7s. Those suckers take up almost a whole page, right? So for each one of their standards, I made them go through and write what they thought. I'm not doing this. They have to decide what are the key verbs and phrases from that standard. And then they had to put that Post-it note on the front of the standard itself. And then when they had I was going to call it an entry. That's not the word. When they had a component that related to that standard, they had to take, this is why they're helpful to be Post-it notes, take all those Post-it notes from those standards and stick them either on the folder that they were using to organize it or on the table in front of them, and use that as almost a checklist to say, did I cover all of the key things that I thought were important about the standard? All right. If the standards already talk about a concept in a convenient, short, sweet phrase, use that phrase. Don't reinvent the wheel. Give them their language right back to them. Now, to be clear, I'm not talking about cutting and pasting 5 lines worth of standard. That's
Where are they?
not effective, but you don't have time, you don't have space for them. I'm talking like take phrases, very short verbs and like 2 or 3 word phrases and copy those and use those to embed. They are looking for the standards. They are trying to give you the benefit of the doubt. They want to see the standards in there. So give them the language of the standards as ties to what you're describing in your classroom. All right. The next one is use good resources. There are great books out there that give you really good ideas. One of my very favorites for national boards is, it's a very classic, it's a simplistic one. It's Best Practice by Zimmelman and Daniels. And my favorite thing, especially if you are in a cohort with other certification areas, you could even probably get away with just buying one copy because it covers pretty much every content area in one handy dandy little book. But the reason why I think it's so helpful is because for every content area, they have almost a cheat sheet of, here are the things that we all acknowledge are good ideas and are best practice in, for instance, middle school science. And that, I think, is really helpful for reminding you of the things that you do. And when I say reminding you, a lot of the time we forget that what we're doing is intentional. We forget that what we're doing is, smart and best practice. Until you see it written down, you say, oh, well, of course I do that. I mean, like, who wouldn't do that? Well, You might be surprised who wouldn't do that. Those cheat sheets for every content area help you remember, oh, that's a thing. I need to mention that. I need to make sure I intentionally and explicitly talk about that. Or if you never ever do it, then that's a moment where you think, this book talks about this. Maybe I want to think about doing some of that because I'm not doing any of it right now. Also, particularly if you're working on component 2, that's right? Yeah, 2. I'm really not good at these numbers, sorry. The book, The Differentiated Classroom by Carol Ann Tomlinson, again, I'm not saying this is rocket science in terms of a book, but it's a very concise, easy to read resource in terms of she has put into writing a lot of the things that we might do without even noticing that we're doing them, or without mentioning them. So in terms of reading the book and saying, oh yeah, I do that all the time, I need to mention that. So that book is good for that, I think. And then there is this is an old book, but so take it with a grain of salt. But I do like it for a couple things. It's great for making a list of buzzwords that you think, oh yeah, that's a better way to say it. I want to say it that way. And then you can make a list of that to use. You can also use this book to remind you what should be happening in your classroom, even if it's not. And then I honestly think that their turns of phrase sometimes are good. And they just say things in a more sophisticated sounding way than perhaps would have come out of my mouth. So in that sense, again, just like the standards, I am not suggesting that you cut and paste whole chunks of that. But you can look at that book and then say, oh, that is the exact same thing I was saying, but that sounds better the way they said it. And then, you can think about using some of their words. Okay, this is getting really nitpicky, but since I just told you got to spend all this time going into excruciating detail about, being Washington and not poof and not magic, especially if you're like me and you can't shut up, maybe you're going to run out of space. If you are, here are just some really desperate ideas. You can take out all the adverbs. It will hurt. You will be sad. It will make you cry. But I promise you don't actually need them. I promise. Take them all out. It's going to be okay. Also, who knew you don't ever actually need the word that? You don't, who knew? You don't need it. And it's 5 spaces, 4 letters in a space. So by the time you take the word out, it's 5 spaces. If you're a person who uses it constantly, you're actually going to be surprised at how much time you space you save. And then if we're really getting desperate, you can use a 3-space indent rather than a full tab indent. That's bottom barrel scraping move, but it does work. Also, you don't have to use, you don't have to keep a space between paragraphs. Sometimes Microsoft Word does that by default. You can take that space right out. There is no need for that. That's wasted space on the page. And then the last thing is you need an editor. And I know that I'm an English teacher, so this is where my brain goes, but just trust me. National boards, their scorers are trained. They will not take off any points if you can't spell. They will not take off any points if you don't know how to use a comma. They really won't. But I do think that you want to make their life as easy as possible. And the reality is, spelling, commas, all that stuff, the function of all that is to make reading clearer and to make it easier and faster for someone to read it. If I'm doing everything I can to get these scorers to see the brilliance that is me, then I don't want to throw up roadblocks. And sometimes, a whole string of misspelled words can be a roadblock. It takes them longer. They might get tripped up. I think it's worth it to ask someone to edit your piece or your writing. Don't ask your CSP. They're going to say no. They can't. But, buy an English teacher in your building a whole bunch of Starbucks, or offer to, cover her class on a planning one day in exchange for this. Throw yourself on the mercy of of an English teacher or of just a friend of yours who happens to be a decent editor. And I'm not saying you got to spend a chunk of money doing this. I'm just saying someone who is a better speller than you, I will be honest, I'm an English teacher, but I cannot spell to save my life. I don't know how I missed that gene. I'm a terrible speller. So you better believe that even though I know exactly what to do with a comma, you better believe that someone else looked at my spelling before I turned it in, just because I don't want to leave anything up to chance. So that's just my recommendation. It's not official, of course. I just think if you can, you should. All right. We are right at the end of our time. So I do want to throw it back to Suzanne to see if there's anything that I have missed in the chat box while I've been jabbering away. Suzanne is going to make sure that this recording is up. Also, I have a worksheet with these things on them. Like, it lists the 5 I think there are 5, the commandments. It lists some of the tips and tricks, all those kinds of things, just in case you don't have to, sit there and try to scribble as I'm writing. So Suzanne will make sure that gets uploaded as well. But here's my information. You can always email me if you have questions. I am not promising that I will have time to, read any of your stuff. I cannot rip your stuff apart, as we've established. I'm not technically a CSP, but I'm close enough that feels a little sketchy ethics-wise. That's why I want you guys I want to get in your head. Hopefully I have brainwashed you all, and now you can be Grindon to each other. However, if you have a question, please, please, please don't hesitate to email me. I'm really happy to help. And then just as a backup, all of this material I'll put it on my website. There's a workshop tab where different things that I've done across the state and other places, you can access all the stuff that is password protected, but it's not anything clever. It's just Grindon resources, all one word, all lowercase, I believe. So that's where you can find everything. And I'll make sure that Elizabeth's rough draft, as well as the PowerPoint, as well as my kind of tips and tricks page, that one worksheet is all up there. So thanks very much. Thanks for hanging in there. Hopefully I didn't run too many people off. And I hope that you are not terrified, but feel like you have some clarity around what to do and what not to do to make your writing a little bit more the NBCT way. So thanks for playing.
Thank you, Kate. So I'm going to stop recording in just a minute. I'm going to give people the opportunity if they wanted to grab the mic and ask a question. I know there's a lot of people that are looking for space-saving tips. And I, I'd put in the chat box that anytime you can cut a line, like that's where you really want to, anytime you have a paragraph with a little bit hanging over, that's when you really want to cut a line. Mm-hmm. A use of a semicolon can be a great thing too, if you can combine a couple of sentences with some ideas that, like, anything to shorten. Mm-hmm. Shorter words. If there's a shorter word that's going to be just as strong, like, use the shorter word. I have not used the ampersand or encouraged that with people because I've always managed to find a way to avoid that. But I have seen people that have used it. I don't think it's certainly not illegal. I just think I think it's awkward, but I don't think it's like you get scored down for it or anything.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think candidates of mine have done it. I do think it's the English teacher in me. Like, I know it's national boards. I kind of can't wrap my head around it. But that's a personal bias, and I know it and I own it. But I will say that I don't remember where it is, but it's called orphan work. Yeah,
somebody has just put that in the chat box too. Okay. The widow orphan thingy or whatever.
Yeah, you can do widows and orphans, which it's a terrible name for it. Why do we call it that? It sounds horrible. But you can fix it so that it will, like, hyphenate a word instead of automatically bringing things down. Mm-hmm.
Well, and there's also a thing, I think it's with that, there's another one of the things that it does is like, if there's a one line, one sentence or part of a sentence that's hanging over from another paragraph, they don't want to like make it be on a page at the top of a page by itself.
Right.
So like it will go ahead and sometimes it automatically wastes a line on a page that you don't even see.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
so like that's the kind of stuff that's really that's in the widow orphan stuff too, and that's another really important way to save space that can save you several lines over the course of a document sometimes.
Definitely.
So I'm sorry, you can hear my kids in the background, I'm sure, but I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay.
And I wanted to also, I forgot to mention, but people probably already know this, that